Thank you. And a big hello into the crowd. That is for me a big black hole. Plus, I see myself speaking, and it's a little bit of a delay. So this is a bit new. But thank you very much to give me this opportunity. And also thank you, Marco Piranti, for this really insightful demonstration of what humanizing technology may mean in the context of a public administration. Public administrations are kind of like the last thought in the whole public sector program that starts with policy design and even policy intent. And public administrations, local municipalities like Torino, are then charged with making these changes happening, with using whatever they are given to provide appropriate public services to citizens. Now, here we are, citizen-centric services and citizen-centric policies. That is what we're looking for today. It's not like we haven't thought about citizens before, but it became clear over the past decade, the latest wave of recognition, I think, that there's a lot of good effort in the public sector by a lot of good people, public policy makers, public managers, public administrators, and yet so many of our services and so many of our policies don't achieve the kind of outcomes that we're striving for. There are other problems, and that's what I will talk about a little bit more today about, and that is that we have such a plurality of voices, of opinions, of thoughts, of experiences that make it sometimes a little bit hard to even act. And act we must. We know it, especially given some of the climate changes, some of the real social injustices that are happening. We know we have to act, and somehow it's a problem to get to this action. And I want to spend the time that I have today to talk a little bit about what design can contribute to that and how we can hopefully address some of these issues by taking a designerly approach to that, a human-centered approach. If you could start the presentation, that would be great. Is it started? There we go. Thank you. So I will start out with what we call an experience-based inquiry, which is the core of human-centered design. And I'm sure Marco Steinberg and some of the previous speakers, Marco Piranti as well, they have addressed experience. They talk about what people experience in their daily lives, how they perceive of their environment, how they are engaging, the opportunities they see, the backgrounds they have. And this is what we're trying to bring back into the decision making, into the ideation, into the understanding of what possible solutions can we generate and create for future policies, for citizen-centric policies, and for citizen-centric public services when we remind ourselves that everything that we as a human being go through forms a world for us. And it's not just the sensational experience, it's what John Dewey calls the qualitative. It's the qualitative, the things that are not just measurable in numbers and not just rationalizable in a sense that we understand it from an analytic approach. It's these qualities that make for good life. It's these qualities that make for a good city. It's these qualities that make for a public value, for the things we care about and that we want to contribute to. And it's in this context of the technological changes and the opportunities we have with these new technologies, be that the digital transformation or the artificial intelligence, it's this need to understand what are the qualities that we can find in these new technologies, and how do these qualities help us provide a rationale and a criteria for going about designing certain policies, certain public services, so that we can then arrive at an outcome that enhances human living, that is guarding our public values that we so treasure, but that are also allowing for new public values to be recognized and to be treated as worthwhile to guard in the future. The qualitative, and this is really an essential part of human-centered design. The qualitative is understood as the background, the thing behind me on which I stand, which is surrounding me, environing me. I'm part of something larger here. And that could be my family. That could be my education, my alma mater, my colleagues, my business, my beliefs, my norms, my values. There's a lot of stuff that is the qualitative that contributes to how I work, how I function, and why I talk today to you in this matter, in this way. And the qualitative is not only the background, it's also the starting point for an inquiry, because we know that's what we have. We need to remind ourselves what that is, but we have it, it's there. And it's also the regulative principle of all thinking. And this is so crucial, because I heard there was a talk about measurement and evaluation and analysis. Well, that has to do also with understanding what are the next steps that we need to take, and what is the logic behind our understanding of that next step. Well, much of that has to do with how we perceive the world, how we are part of the world, our knowledge, our doing, our norms, our values, and so on. So if you think about this as an essential part of human-centered design, this qualitative, we can move to how do we go about designing? Well, we inquire, we investigate. And for John Dewey, he delivered a very complicated, I admit that, explanation of inquiry. But if you read that carefully, it's exactly what we're charged to do in a complex situation that a city of Turin finds itself, but also anytime we're going about designing something that is supposed to help people better function in the world, and that is supposed to also, at the same time, say, protect the planet. It's a very complex web where there are a lot of individual pieces that we sometimes see, sometimes are not aware of. Sometimes we have to even discover them. Sometimes we have to invent them. But these are pieces that need to come together to allow for something new to emerge, and to allow for something new to be consistent and coherent in a way so that we can use it, understand it, and make meaning of it, and that it fits with our context that we're striving to build, the world, the community, the municipality, if you wish. So Dewey talks about it as the controlled or directed transformation, so there's an element of change, of an indeterminate situation. That is a situation where it's not clear. Is this a path? Is this a one-way street? Is this highway? You know, what is it? This is indeterminate, where the situation is not clear. What do we make of that situation? And into one that is so determinate, it's one that is so clear and so concise and coherent and consistent in its constituent distinction, that is in all the parts and relations, as to convert the elements of that original situation into a unified whole. Now, for some of you designers, there's a very simple counterstatement by Herbert Simon that says, designing is when you turn an existing situation into a preferred one. That's a simple statement. This is a little bit more complex because it addresses also the challenge of not just moving from left to right, but really to going deep into the system and digging out what makes the situation problematic, for whom, for which people, why, in what context, in what situation, and then how does that link up with the systemic requirements, let's say the laws or the technical limitations and so on. So that as a background. And then we have another aspect from design, which is communication as a way to become actionable. I mentioned in the beginning that there is many times, especially in policy making and in these public challenges, a fear. And Marco Pironti talked a lot about fears. There are blockers, that lead to dispute, controversy, debates, that then nobody feels there is a way out of a situation. We are stuck between a rock and a hard place. But if we go back and we remind ourselves about the experience-based inquiry about, and if we enable ourselves to bring to the fore those qualities in a situation and the qualities that make a situation desirable versus not desirable, then we can open the path to move forward. And for Richard McKeon, this is a very clear forward strategy. It's a way of thinking and a method of analyzing, which he argues we apply to all fundamental problems. Now, the interesting thing is here, Richard McKeon underlines the analysis part here, whereas John Dewey is bringing in this experience and the quality into the whole process. And when you look at it together, it makes a lot of sense, and it helps us really understand how we go about designing with Richard McKeon's 3 approaches of: first, you discover ambiguities. But that doesn't just happen. It requires that we start somewhere with an understanding of the qualitative, with an inquiry into that, what makes these qualities of a situation for people desirable, bothersome, harmful, or not working at all. Then we go about inventing new possibilities. After we have opened this space, discovered the ambiguities which allow us to go beyond dispute, controversy, debate, we can actually begin to try out something from that, what we have learned about these qualities in a given situation. And then we can express this in new values, or even maintain the old values, but express them in a way that are appropriate to communicate how we perceive, for example, the public values that we want to promote in the future. And that is some basic frame for design that we're using here. Now, how do we apply this back to humanizing technology and also to public services? I've prepared a slide for you here, which should come up. Does it? Yeah, it's a little bit small here maybe, but if you look at the left-hand side, you see that there's a problem of people interacting with government through public services. On the right hand, you see, well, governments and public organizations face massive challenges. You probably heard from Marcus Steinberg and some of the other speakers today what these challenges are. I can only reiterate the ones that I'm working with, especially in the DACH region, that is Germany, Austria, Switzerland, but also internationally. But the key problems right now are that we have an aging workforce, we have a digital transformation, we have new demographic groups, some of them aging as well, and we have new demands and a much differently, the quality of, for example, digital transformation outside the public service is very different right now than from the quality of the digital transformation within an office. We just had a conversation last night with a public administrator, and there is still this problem that many public administrations are not even equipped appropriately with the digital equipment, the software, and all that. But of course, we also have the problem that there is a lack of knowledge about digital services and the implications of and the opportunities of digital tools, of the digital development, which of course is now moving towards artificial intelligence, which is yet another level of complexity and provides yet another quality of experience that we need to start looking at in order to understand how that contributes to our future communities, municipalities, to how that enhances our human living. And we very much find that in the public sector, as Marco Pironti also stated, there's a lack of knowledge, there's a lack of training. People aren't there to have this kind of knowledge. And yet we need to start shaping these kind of realms, the products, the services, but also the policies around them in order to ensure that our public value, that our pluralistic democracy can function still with these new technologies and in ways that we treasure, not because there is a dominant technological tool available, for example. So if you look at the center here of this chart, you see that I have emphasized that there is the individual, the organization, the policy, and the society. And when we design in the public realm, and actually also in the private, we start with the individual, the qualities of life, the qualities of human dignity, human rights, social justice, participation in society, avoiding stigmas, all that. And we go back, of course, into the organization because all the public services are offered by organizations, public organizations. But then we understand that's just one part, because public organizations, and I'm sure Marco Pironti would agree with that, they have to follow policies and laws, and they are not made by the public administration. They are imposed on them. And ultimately, all this, as it works together, is shaping our society. And so the way we approach this from a human-centered design perspective is that we inquire into these relationships and we use communication to articulate and make actionable new paths, allow for new developments, allow for new inventions. And of course, technology, as you see, has framed this conversation always. So, if you go back, and there was a lot of talk about fear by Marco Pironti, if you go back to the 1800th century, there you find books that tell you that when you ride on the train from Manchester to Lancaster in England, and the train is more than 60 kilometers per hour fast, the speed is higher than that, women are in danger of losing fertility, right? So just as a reminder that when we start to engage with new technologies, we tend to have a bit of a fear and respect, and yet we cannot not engage with technologies, and especially from a design perspective, it is our challenge and our responsibility to engage with that. So here is a picture. And again, I'm resonating here with Marco's talk before. The home. This is where life happens. This is where the qualitative is in full bloom. Here we have a technology, obviously, because somebody's shown in a screen and somebody's sitting on a sofa. But this is something where we need to remind ourselves that in the end of the day, what is it that we want to achieve with these technologies, and where are people, and how do we want to live, and how can we then give shape to these new services to make this work in the future. And yes, cost saving, of course, is a big deal, but it can't be only, because there is always cost attached in other ways. We have learned in design to talk very much about the cost of doing nothing, or the cost of other things. For example, when digital services don't work, or when the office is not open, how many work hours are wasted by standing in line, how much trust is lost in the government, how much confidence is lost in a governance in politicians and in those who govern. So there's different ways to think about this kind of cost, but let's stay with the home. And then you can see that, that's good. This is where we bring together public administration and public management with policy making and with policy design, with the policy intent. And the key thing that we have to address is that we keep services and people in the center of this process from the beginning to the end. And let me just tell you that this is not something that is very common yet. It's increasingly at least addressed and talked about. Even policy researchers are now turning to experience-based theories to understand better how policies and policy intents can be generated in ways that are much closer to the needs of people and the citizen centricity that we're looking for. And in this case, I want to go one step further to bring out again everything I've been saying so far, to bring that together and tell you that this is what's happening from a design perspective in the policy realm, in the public sector, and this is beginning to be addressed by various actors in the field. So the first idea, or the first step here, is we're going on the qualitative inquiry, on the experience-based inquiry that allows us to discover ambiguities, to understand what is the policy intent that we really need to address here, and how can we articulate that in a way through which then we can invent a new policy and new services that then can be implemented in ways that express and communicate our new values, our current values in this context. Now, the whole part I described that this is an inquiry happening nonstop, right? This goes from the beginning to the end. And it's a very different way to approach policy making than from a decision-making approach or from a problem-solving approach. Because here we don't even know the problem yet, and we accept that we don't know the problem. We treasure the situation because it allows us to challenge and to inquire into what is actually going on in these qualities. What are the qualities that are driving the situation, and where do we want to go? Right. I'm going to quickly, after all of this very dry, hopefully not so dry, but after this maybe heavy design thinking approach, I would like to also present some examples where this kind of work is being done, and what this means to apply that in reality. And Chile is a very interesting case in point here. When you look at the Chilean government, and also when you look at at the developments over the past years, and actually Markus Steinberg has been very active in this as well, and participated in these kind of conversations. The idea that you even start asking, like, why do we need a different government? Why do we need a different form of a state? that started in 2016 in Santiago de Chile. And it's probably not fair to say it started, but it culminated in a conference, an international conference, where many civil servants and public managers and also policymakers attended and started to rethink how they go about this new state, this opportunity to give new form to what a future state needs and what the qualities are of that. And in line with that, and also as a key player, was the Laboratorio de Gobierno, which counts as one of those innovation labs that are still en vogue, so to speak. A true innovation lab in the sense that they really experimented and they put the experience of people into the center of their doing. These qualitative approaches became central in their ways forward. Now, it's not just because of the Laboratorio Gobierno that things have moved to another level in Chile, but I do want to emphasize that what we're seeing right now in Chile is, of course, a massive design undertaking. There is an effort to rewrite the constitution, which, of course, is the policy of all policies in a government, in a state. And they're really struggling right now with understanding what are the qualities in this and how can we give shape to a policy that would allow for the other qualities to follow from that. So much of what the activities here involve are discovering ambiguities, are inventing new possibilities, are expressing existing values, and generating new values and giving them expression, communicating that in that process. So just to provide an example. And then we have also in Latin America a much more technologically or closer to technology, closer to the theme of this conference, an example, which is the user experience, the digital user experience department at the Ministry of Economics and Finance in Brasilia, where it became clear that there needs to be a push for digital services, of course, also for cost reasons, but not only, and that this needs to also ensure that people can use those services. And they are kind of like a check for many other departments and ministries that produce digital services, and they're going out and checking with people in the public to understand, is it working, what's not working. A very qualitative approach, by the way, yeah. And it's very interesting because I didn't include this in today's conversation or in today's presentation, but since Jan Christoph talked about digital participation and digital public participation, this has been a theme in my work over the past 2 years, because there is also there's so many dimensions attached to that. As I said, on the one hand, digital participation of those civil servants and being able to get the people in the office and in the public management, in the public administrations on board and able to work with them in a meaningful and also good way for them to conduct their work and to accomplish their tasks and achieve their outcomes. And then, of course, you have this challenge to bring on the public, citizens and non-citizens alike. And what we see is, of course, very much a success in bringing on people to public services. But as I pointed out somewhere else, we are, when we talk about humanizing technology, we have to understand that there might also be a cutoff age when people turn, I don't know, 80 years old or so. And maybe from 45 to 80, they have done well with digital public services. But after 80 years old, maybe the cognitive abilities are no longer serving them well for engagement, let's say with a software update, understanding the password, even grasping when there was a little change. And how do we cope with that? So these are also some things that I would like to position here in this conference. So think about that. This is another example from Brazil, and they're collaborating actually in the across with government. And this is the National School for Public Administration, ENAP, in Brazil, which really points to another challenge in the public sector, and that addresses the training and the education of future public servants. Where will they understand technologies to begin with, so that they can also begin to understand and explore how these technologies contribute to humanizing public services? And maybe we're not. So this is part of a larger task that is well underway. It's urgent. Different schools here in Germany as well, the German University for Public Administration is beginning to do this. But there's no real coherent or systemic approach to that in almost any of the countries I know. And yet the public sector, the civil servants, the public administration, public policy makers will have a huge role in making sure that our future public values are still going to the heart of what we consider a public value to be, what we want a public value to be. And maybe it cannot be just to call, hey, Google. It's a funny story. I will talk about that in a moment when I talk about voice assistants, but let's go on. Yeah, so I wanted to also point out that these developments have triggered interest, and there are a lot of public administrators who are very active now, also trying to learn about these qualitative aspects, about new methods, about new ways of developing public services, engaging citizens, and also rethinking how they go about making policies. And one of the bigger events there is the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, which will take place this year in September, and which has really, it's the fourth time, and has really generated a great momentum. And technology, of course, is a key issue there for this conference as well. As a matter of fact, it's the second time that it goes online. And you may know that, or some of you in the audience may know that it's not easy for public servants to go online, because they're not supposed to use their private laptop, but then the public laptop really doesn't have the capability or is not allowed to access this program that is being used for the conference. So there are many struggles here. Opportunity, of course, is also there with new technologies, and I'm always happy to share the student project from bachelor students in our school who were participating with the joint research committee EU Policy Lab in Brussels, the EU Policy Lab, on envisioning what could the future be in terms of public services. And of course, technology is opening so many more ways of engaging differently. This qualitative, the experience, what kind of qualities do we have for the future engagement of a citizen, of a person with their government? And in this case, there was a very interesting proposal where the students said, like, the quality of paying taxes, it would be so much better if we had at least about a 30% say of where my taxes that I'm okay to pay, but maybe I want to then determine or be able to choose where I can add this particular portion of my taxes to maybe increase pay for healthcare workers, or maybe to build better roads or something else. And this is what we're after when I talk about inquiring, when I talk about discovering inventing and expressing. This is an expression of a new value, and it's an invention of a new public service that is related to something very old and to a very guarded public value, namely the redistribution of wealth amongst society. So this is a very nice example for that. And then here's Alexa finally, where we see back to the home, this thing or something like that will be in many homes in the future, already is. And what does that mean for our relationship with government? Will I be able to talk to a tax bot at midnight when I have a question about my taxes? And will that mean that I have, a talk that I could only have usually if I go to the office, the government office, and I sit across a government official at a certain point, at an appointment I made. But now I casually sit on the sofa, I have a glass of wine, and I'm just calling, hey, TaxBot, can you help me? And yet I'm working and I'm talking to maybe a government or a quasi-government person. So these are things that should give us food for thought, also in understanding that we need to discover, that we need to invent, that we need to explore, and also give these new expressions a form and shape. And we are very much asked to do this on criteria that we don't understand, because we don't understand exactly what the technology is. We don't understand exactly how we as humans want to interact and engage with that. But that's why we need to inquire. And that's why we need to have these qualitative approaches and use them to better understand what we might want to do here and where we can go with that. And just another sign in how these kind of technologies are entering into our homes. I found myself having an iPhone hanging in my tree here in the house because somehow we needed a video camera, and that was the only way where we could hang up the video camera. But think about this. This is humanizing technology, because this is what we do with technology when it's there and when we see what we can do with it. But certainly we don't want to have, these bridges where we hang our iPhones in our plants around the living room. But that's something that gives us food for thought, again, for how to go about this in the future. And with that, I'm actually closing my session here, only reminding everyone that the global goals are 17 boxes, all of which explicitly call on us for inquiring and for discovering and for inventing and for expressing new products and services, new communication in this context. And to make matters closer to public sector, number 16 emphasizes the need for peace, justice, and strong institutions. When we are in a time where polarization and fragmentations are huge, and we find people not even talking to each other anymore, we go, like I say, on different orbits around a planet. We need to find ways to engage with each other again. And these methods and approaches that both John Dewey and Richard McKeon provide us with are powerful tools, powerful means to get people together and to have them work out what is working, what the qualities are that we're looking for, and to make us able to act, for example, in big issues like climate change. And that is my final slide, and I would very much like to thank you, because what we should finally recognize, in my opinion, is that design is not something that is owned by the design school, it's not something that is owned by the designer, but and I'm actually disagreeing with Marco Pironti there. Public administrators are more designers than they think. There are a lot of shape-giving activities there. Policymakers are designers, and what we have to come to terms with is that there's a common design that we're all having a role in creating, in giving form, in expressing. And if we're all responsible for it, maybe we can also all become more actionable in it through these different activities. Thank you.